I have said from the start, Blake Griffin has been overhyped.
There was always a little jealousy between Chris and Blake, and there wasn't necessarily the trust that they needed to have.
Here come the Clippers. Paul with the ball.
It was weird because separately everybody was really cool with each other. Off the court, everybody sort of got along. And then there was just so much like pettiness. It was just pettiness.
One of the most stunning comebacks.
I think we weren't mentally ready to take that next step, and I think in the end it cost us.
The tale of the LA Clippers' Lob City era is a story of drama and disappointment. They were assembled with exciting expectations, with a #1 pick in Blake Griffin leading the way. Once the team traded for superstar point guard Chris Paul in December of 2011, the hopes of banners began growing. By the end of CP3's tenure in 2017, the team was left in ruin. A group that once felt hopeful about their odds of winning slowly lost confidence, with every season bringing a different level of failure. In the 2013 playoffs, they lost in round 1 after winning 56 games. In 2014 and 15, they won 56 and 57 games, but both seasons ended in second round exits. Those first 3 years were their best chances at swinging for the title, but each time it ended in them striking out. The hiring of Doc Rivers was expected to catapult them into new levels, but what followed was consistent playoff failure. Chris Paul and Blake Griffin, the two star players, both grew beef that saw them fighting on court by the time they were in different jerseys. The LA Clippers tragically squandered each and every gift at a title run, but why did this happen? Why did a roster that seemed so talented develop chemistry issues and fail every year? This is how the Clippers wasted talent and failed to perform when the lights shine brightest. The 2008-09 season was one of misery for LA. They finished with 19 wins, which was poor enough for the #1 pick. The 2009 draft is often known for having James Harden and Steph Curry, but what many forget is that Blake Griffin was head and shoulders above all of them. Blake was seen as a franchise-changing talent, a future superstar, and he was selected #1 overall. The 2009 preseason was Griffin's chance to show his game-changing talents to the world, but tragedy quickly struck. Blake injured himself on a dunk in the last preseason game, breaking his left kneecap. A horrible injury that would sideline the exciting big for the entirety of the season. LA now had nothing to look forward to. They tanked the season, winning 29 games, which gave them the 8th slot in the 2010 draft. Al-Farouq Aminu was chosen at that pick, who wouldn't evolve into much, just a solid role player. The 2010-11 season brought anticipation for Clippers fans. They finally had their #1 pick back in action, and they were ready to dominate. From the very beginning, Blake Griffin unleashed his limitless potential to the NBA, averaging 22 points with 12 rebounds a game. Mind-boggling numbers out the gate that not only handed him a Rookie of the Year award, but an All-Star appearance. That's right, the rookie was one of only a handful in NBA history to ever achieve All-Star status in year 1. He and Eric Gordon were both 20 points per game scorers. The Clippers had already established an encouraging young duo. As those two were carrying the team, another player became the topic of discussion. Baron Davis was making $28 million over the next 2 seasons, and the Clippers ownership wasn't interested in paying that. Fast forward to the 2011 trade deadline, and LA shipped off this bad contract to the Cavs. All they had to do was attach an unprotected first-round pick. What a steal. A normal trade at a glance, but it turned out that this first-round pick would turn into the #1 pick in the 2011 draft. The player selected with that spot was Kyrie Irving. Ouch. This pick had a 2.8% chance of going #1, which is why there was little caution in trading it. The pressure was now on the Clippers. They just gave up a franchise point guard for nothing, so they needed to make a splash. The 2011-2012 season started out later than usual due to a lockout, which gave the Clippers extra time to plot their next move. Immediately, Chris Paul's name began floating in the trade market. CP3 was an all-star point guard, an MVP caliber player that would skyrocket any team's chances of winning. Only one issue: he was already on his way to the Los Angeles Lakers. Well, that was the case until the move was vetoed by Commissioner David Stern. A perfectly normal trade was called off because of basketball reasons. The Clippers, seeing this, being the eager opportunists that they were, swooped in and acquired the guard. A hefty package at that. They gave up Al-Farouq Aminu and Eric Gordon, two young pieces, as well as a first-round pick. A price to pay that seemed worth it. Chris Paul was the perfect player to put alongside Griffin, the best passer and the best dunker, both on the same team. DeAndre Jordan started rising as well. The former 2008 second-round pick would be a great piece alongside Paul. This was their chance to compete for a title, and it all began now. 2011-2012 brought a massive improvement for Los Angeles. They went from 32 wins out of 82 to 40 wins out of 66. Blake Griffin continued his ascension to all-star status, improving his efficiency across the board and averaging 20. Chris Paul filled every piece of the puzzle, bringing in 19 points a game on 37% from 3. The scoring was nice, but the passing was his biggest plus. CP3 averaged 9 assists per game. The Clippers had now earned the nickname Lob City for their incredible alley-oops that were displayed on a nightly basis. It took some time for the team to gel, but by the second half of the season, they closed out winning 14 of 19. This 40-26 record was good enough for the 5th seed. Considering LA was just 2 more wins away from earning the 3rd seed, this season was a success, the highest winning percentage in their history. Now it was time to show what they were made of in the postseason. The 4th-seeded Memphis Grizzlies were up first in round 1, and Game 1 was nothing short of a masterpiece. LA was down by 24 points in the 4th quarter and proceeded to storm back to win it, hitting a barrage of threes. Nick Young nailed 3 triples, Chris Paul hit clutch free throws, and the Clippers won. A miraculous comeback that set the tone for the series as LA jumped to a 3-1 lead. Games 5 and 6 were a chance to win and close out, but Marc Gasol scored 23 in both to force a Game 7. This could have been a disaster, but thankfully for Los Angeles, they won Game 7 by double digits. LA nearly escaped a terrible fate, but all Clippers fans could do was wipe the sweat off their forehead in relief, as the Spurs were up next. This series versus San Antonio is often forgotten by fans of LA, and for good reason. The Spurs dominated from games 1 to 4, sweeping their opponent with ease. The Clippers simply ran into a more talented team, not a surprising outcome by any means. LA had a solid roster, but they needed more time to gel before going to the next level. The goal for the 2012 offseason was simple: continue putting pieces around your core. Blake Griffin inked a 5-year max extension, a worthy bag for the franchise star. They did lose Nick Young and Mo Williams, but brought in Lamar Odom, Matt Barnes, and Jamal Crawford. By far, the most important piece was Crawford, who would emerge into a valuable offensive punch off the bench. The message was clear: the Los Angeles Clippers were in win-now mode, and it was time to see if they could back up the talk. The 2012-13 Clippers certainly backed up all the talk, beginning with a 25-6 record. Blake Griffin and Chris Paul continued to make noise every night. Fans knew what to expect out of them. What many didn't expect was the emergence of Jamal Crawford, Matt Barnes, and DeAndre Jordan. Those 3 took a heavy load off of Paul and Griffin. Crawford averaged 16 a game, becoming a 6th Man of the Year candidate with his polished offense. Matt Barnes averaged 10 points, and DeAndre Jordan became a walking highlight reel thanks to CP3. This high-paced offense shot the Clippers to the number 4 seed in the West, with hefty expectations to their name. Last year was their chance to get their feet wet, gain some chemistry, and now was the time to win. The 2013 playoffs saw a familiar foe step up to face the Clippers. It was the Memphis Grizzlies. Both teams had identical records, only this time Los Angeles had home court advantage. Everything began going to plan through games 1 and 2. LA won both, game 2 being on a Chris Paul game winner. Moments like these are why the Clippers took the plunge to acquire him. CP3 was clutch, not afraid of the moment, and his team was now up 2-0. Then disaster struck. The Grizzlies won games 3 and 4 to tie the series at 2. More bad news followed. Blake Griffin suffered a high ankle sprain that would limit his play for the rest of the series. Game 5 wasn't close either. The Grizzlies pulled away in the third to take a 3-2 lead. Panic was arising in LA, and they did nothing to stop the ensuing fear, as Memphis stomped all over them in Game 6 to win the series. A sudden collapse that only got worse once Griffin got hurt. The Clippers were in the driver's seat and lost control. Chris Paul was his usual self throughout the series numbers-wise, but it didn't matter. The limited play of Griffin automatically put Los Angeles at a disadvantage that the Grizzlies had no problem exploiting, and the Clippers had been knocked out again. Changes were needed. LA immediately fired their coach Vinny Del Negro and traded for Doc Rivers. You heard that right. LA traded a first-round pick to acquire the former champion head coach in Doc Rivers. Doc had won it all in 2008, and Los Angeles was hoping his winning experience could rub off on the team. Chris Paul saw this move and happily signed a 5-year max deal. LA wasn't done just yet though. They then traded the 2010 draft pick Eric Bledsoe to the Magic for JJ Redick. Redick was a sharpshooter, someone who could provide needed spacing for a Clippers team that was already so talented offensively. Darren Collison replaced Bledsoe, signing for $2 million, a good deal for a backup guard. A solid offseason by many measures, a new head coach, more depth off the bench, and a Chris Paul extension. Things were looking up for Los Angeles. The 2013-14 Clippers were by far the most talented version of this team, and they began heating up at the right time. The second half of this season saw them win 20 out of their last 25 to win 57 games, the most in their franchise's history. This wasn't a shock either. Blake Griffin ballooned his stats to 24 a game with 10 rebounds, earning his 4th All-Star appearance. Blake was now a top 10 player by every metric, finishing 3rd in MVP voting. Chris Paul finished 7th in that same category, scoring 19 a night with 11 assists per game. 7 players on the team averaged double digits in scoring. This squad had overwhelming depth from every side. JJ Redick shot 40% from 3. Matt Barnes and Darren Collison brought offense off the bench, and Jamal Crawford won the 6th Man of the Year award. One of the most talented rosters in NBA history, LA was good enough to earn the number 3 seed in a stacked Western Conference. One first-team All-NBA player in CP3, one second-team All-NBA player in Blake Griffin, and one playoff appearance set to take place against the Golden State Warriors. The Baby Warriors were led by a hungry Steph Curry who hadn't emerged into an MVP just yet. The start of this series wasn't ideal. Golden State took Game 1 by 3 points on the road to stun the Clippers. Game 2 was a blowout in LA's favor, and Game 3 was a near collapse, as Chris Paul may have gotten away with a foul on this Curry 3. Both teams battled back and forth to tie the series at 3, forcing a Game 7 that the Clippers just barely won. LA had escaped the claws of a future dynasty waiting to happen, with Paul and Griffin combining for 46 to win. Clutch performances by the two stars that showed they could step up when needed, and Los Angeles was on their way to round 2. The Oklahoma City Thunder were up next, as the MVP and Kevin Durant looked to guide his team to the top of the West. Chris Paul and Blake Griffin weren't gonna let that happen without a fight, and this series kicked off with a Clipper win on the road. A 17-point victory that saw Chris Paul shine with 32. In Game 5, with the series tied at 2, the Clippers entered OKC needing a W, and it looked like they were going to get one. Chris Paul nailed a mid-range jumper with 49 seconds left to put his team up by 7, and the game was all but over. LA now had a chance to take a 3-2 lead and head back home with the opportunity to advance. However, what followed this excitement was pure dread. The Clippers watched in horror as the Thunder went on an 8-0 run to win it. One of the greatest comebacks in NBA history, and an all-time choke for a Los Angeles team that had the chance to seal it. This destroyed any possible momentum they were building. The Thunder took Game 6 in Staples to end the Clippers season. By far the worst ending yet, LA had every chance to capitalize and go to the Western Conference Finals, but failed in miserable fashion. This was a level of disaster that could either make or break a team. The Clippers had two paths they could go down from this point. They could either play their cards right and use this loss as a learning experience, or this collapse could set the negative standard for how they would play come playoff time. The summer of 2014 arrived with little to no changes regarding the roster. The team remained about the exact same. On the flip side, the front office drastically changed. Doc Rivers was named the president of basketball operations. Doc remained the head coach, but now he was also the dealer when it came to trades. This could have played a part in the future locker room turmoil, as your head coach who gave you pregame speeches could easily trade you. Regardless, the plan was simple. Do what you did last year, but actually perform well in the playoffs. The Clippers did just that, winning 56 games and continuing their regular season dominance. Blake Griffin and Chris Paul didn't miss a beat, both remaining all-star caliber players. The bench was iffy at times, but did its job. Jamal Crawford kept up his excellence as the sixth man, and the team had 6 players who all scored above double digits in points. The regular season was phenomenal per usual, but spectators cared little about what the Clippers could do in 82 games, but rather what they could do in the final 16. The 2015 playoffs saw LA wedge into the 3rd seed, so who would they be playing in round 1? Oh, the defending champion Spurs. Wait, what? That's right. A first round series that could have easily been the Western Conference Finals was set to take place in Los Angeles. Both teams split the first 4 games, setting up a crucial Game 5 that the veteran Spurs won by 4. The Clippers had their backs against the wall now, and they could not afford to lose this series. They survived Game 6 on the road with Blake Griffin's 26 points, and Game 7 was setting up to be the biggest challenge in the Clippers era yet. These 48 minutes of play were an absolute nail-biter down the wire, and with both teams tied at 109, Chris Paul decided to call game. The greatest part about this shot is that Paul wasn't even 100%. He was playing on a bad hamstring, yet he still stepped up. One of the most iconic moments of the Lob City Clippers era, and just like that, LA had knocked off the defending champs. Fans hoped this impressive series victory could give LA the momentum they needed to make a title run. The Houston Rockets were up next in round 2, and the Clippers certainly opened up with positive energy. Los Angeles won Game 1 with Griffin's 26 points and 14 rebounds. Then in Games 3 and 4, Redick scored 31 and DeAndre Jordan scored 26. Both were wins, and the Clippers were now up 3-1 on the Rockets. James Harden and Dwight Howard had both been contained, and LA was feasting on the paint. With a chance to close out in Game 5 on the road, the Rockets exploded and won by 21. Not exactly a shocker. Many believed Game 6 in Los Angeles would be the final blow to Houston. The Clippers were in prime time position to finally advance to the Western Conference Finals. All the years of tough endings and heartbreak would be worth it. This was their moment, and they failed. Los Angeles led by double digits in the 4th quarter of Game 6, but blew it, as Josh Smith took over down the stretch to carry the Rockets to a victory. A complete and utter choke job by LA. They had the perfect chance to win the series right then and there, but couldn't. Josh Smith and Corey Brewer combined for 29 4th quarter points. 2 role players destroyed them and sucked all of the energy out of the arena. Game 7 was another L. Los Angeles got completely stunned and embarrassed by a team they had every opportunity to beat. An ending that would be remembered for the wrong reasons. This moment for the LA Clippers will forever be immortalized in NBA infamy. The 2015 offseason saw a decrease in depth. They traded Matt Barnes for Lance Stevenson and brought in Paul Pierce, Wesley Johnson, and ironically enough, Josh Smith. DeAndre Jordan, despite many rumors that he would depart for Dallas, re-signed with the team on a 4-year, $87 million deal. The once formidable core of old wasn't becoming any younger, and some feared if the Clippers were running out of chances. The 2015-16 season saw a bit of a decline in the team's overall play. They began below 500 at 7-8, but slowly got things rolling as the season progressed. The lack of depth became visible. There were holes in every position for the team. Pablo Prigioni was not a suitable backup point guard. Wesley Johnson and Paul Pierce weren't good options at the 3. Lastly, Luke Mbah-a-Moute and Josh Smith weren't solid options at the backup 4. Chris Paul and Blake Griffin could only give you so much. There had to be other players who could step up, and there weren't. And speaking of him, Blake Griffin only played 35 games this season after dealing with a left quad injury. There was always concern surrounding Griffin and his health, and an injury like this left fans wondering how long his prime could go for. Despite these issues, the Clippers still won 53 games, which gave them the 4th seed. The top 3 seeds in their conference were all far more talented, so if LA wanted any chances of contending, they needed everyone to step up. The Portland Trailblazers were up first in round 1. A point guard battle of Damian Lillard and Chris Paul was set to take place. The first strike came from LA, as the Clippers took games 1 and 2 by 20 points apiece, with CP3 combining for 53 points total. The team wasn't perfect, but you can never count out the experience of championship head coaching and veteran players. Portland won the next 2 to tie the series. Los Angeles had been in this position before. Game 5 took place in LA, and to the horror of Clippers fans all around the world, they saw the names of Chris Paul and Blake Griffin on the inactives list. That's right, the 2 most important players for the team had been sidelined for the most significant game of the season. For Blake Griffin, that quad injury he'd been dealing with for the entire season finally caught up to him, and he was out for the rest of the playoffs. A massive blow to the team, but that wasn't even the biggest loss. Chris Paul broke his hand in Game 4, and he would also be out for the rest of the series. The look of defeat on Paul's face told the whole story. In the past, LA had lost because of poor play to teams that they should have beaten, or failure to execute when the lights shine brightest. This time around, it wasn't the choking that decided their fate, but injuries. The Blazers won the next 2 and took the series, knocking off the Clippers in round 1. A heartbreaking ending, and this loss exposed a sense of urgency that was slowly rising in the Clippers organization. Were they good enough? The 2016 offseason began with the re-signing of Jamal Crawford and Austin Rivers. Besides that, the team remained the same, with the one and only positive of free agency being a meeting with Kevin Durant. No longer were the Clippers seen as championship contenders. They were now looked at as nothing more than a fringe playoff team. To add on to this, CP3 would be a free agent in the summer of 2018. If the Clippers didn't turn things around quickly, he'd be on the way out. The 2016-17 season didn't cure any fears. LA won the fewest games since 2012 with 51. Chris Paul and Blake Griffin both missed 21 games each. DeAndre Jordan was the only all-star on the team. The Clippers had sunk deeper into the waters than they ever had before, and the 2017 playoffs versus Utah was their last chance at salvation. Game 1 began and ended in the worst way possible. A 35-year-old Joe Johnson hit the game winner on the road to stun the fans in Staples Center. The Clippers didn't let this get to them, winning games 2 and 3 to take a 2-1 series lead. 2 needed victories, but they came at a huge price. In Game 3, Blake Griffin suffered a big toe injury and would be out for the rest of the playoffs. A brutal loss when it looked like the team was finally gaining momentum to advance to the second round. Utah won the next 2 to take a 3-2 lead, but Chris Paul wasn't going to let his squad lose this easily. He scored 29 points on the road to force a Game 7 at home. Unfortunately for LA, that was the best it got. They lost in Game 7 at home by 13. Another season of letdown, and by this point, the Clippers front office was fed up. On June 27, 2018, the LA Clippers traded Chris Paul to the Houston Rockets for Patrick Beverley, Lou Williams, Montrezl Harrell, and a first rounder. The hope was that LA could compete for a championship with Blake Griffin as the #1 option. They re-signed Griffin to a 5-year max contract deal, but when the 2017-18 season wasn't going to plan, they traded him too. You heard that right. They shipped Griffin off to Detroit only a few months after they claimed he was a franchise player. Trading Griffin and Paul marked the end of Lob City. an era that started out so promising but ended so horribly. When Blake Griffin was first drafted in 2009, he brought excitement to a team that had been in basketball purgatory for decades. When Chris Paul was acquired in late 2011, that excitement turned into genuine belief that the Clippers could win their first championship in franchise history. When former champion head coach Doc Rivers was traded for in June 2013, these expectations grew to new levels. Perhaps they grew too big, because what followed was a complete disaster. Each regular season brought a new hope that maybe things this time could be different. The exhilarating highlights that took place each game captivated the fans of Los Angeles, and the roster on paper appeared to be stacked. Come playoff time, when the pressure grew, the team underperformed. Each postseason brought more losing. An era that began with hope and optimism ended with anger and frustration. The players that once happily went to battle for each other became enemies. The once positive locker room soon turned to one full of resentment. In the words of Matt Barnes, they became their own worst enemy. The Clippers were just too talented for their own good. Ego was the downfall of this team. Lob City could have left a legacy unlike any other in basketball, as one of the most transcendent teams in NBA history. Instead, their legacy is one of failure.